Welcome to Under the Hood, your fortnightly insight and recap into accounting's leading topics and practical insights. Brought to you by AccountantsDaily.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Under the Hood, brought to you by AccountantsDaily. Happy Tuesday, everybody. Hope you've all been well. My name is Emma Partis, and this episode we're going to be diving into a very interesting and timely topic, how AI is shaping the future of audit. To break down this topic, I'm joined in the studio by Elenie Carey, KPMG Australia's CTO of Audit and Assurance, to chat about how AI is revolutionizing the audit profession and how human expertise is being balanced and augmented by new tech. Elenie, welcome to the studio. Welcome to the podcast. How are you going?
Thank you for having me. I'm fantastic on this beautiful Tuesday morning.
Yeah, great to hear. And it's really great to have you on. And I'm sure the listeners will be very excited to hear your perspectives as somebody pretty high up in the tech audit space. And obviously, we hear a lot that AI is causing a lot of shifts in the accounting industry, but I have heard that audit is one place where it's not just going to save time for practitioners, but it's actually going to completely change the way that auditors can analyze these really high volumes of information. So I'm really excited to get into that. But before we get into it, Elenie, could you give us a little insight into who you are, your career, and how you got to where you are today?
Oh, I'd love to. So, my name is Elenie Carey, and I am CTO and responsible for the delivery strategy for audit and assurance for KPMG Australia. So, like many people in the profession, I started off in audit. I was primarily auditing tech, media, entertainment clients. And, if you think back 20 years ago, there was so much disruption and change happening in industry at that time. So, I used to audit one of the large record labels, and it was when digital music was first exploding and trying to watch them grapple with how do you pay royalties to music artists? Is this new tech here to stay, or is it a fad? And so seeing that disruption first off really made me sit back and pause and go, wow, change is all around us. And so you have to either be excited by it and jump on board and constantly reskill to maintain relevance, or somewhat get, left behind and struggle with other players coming into the market. And so, having that audit background, and audit's great, right? Because it gives you so many diverse skills and experiences to jump into lots of different things. I then, later in my career, joined the Innovation Lab in KPMG New York, which was all around doing fast prototypes and proofs of concept around emerging technologies. So, creating a sandbox for blockchain,
Wow.
experimenting with apps. I did a pilot with using drones for inventory coverage and really just experimenting with what could some of these new technologies be. And not only what are the technologies, but then how do we upskill our people to be excited by it? How do we give them design thinking and critical thinking skills so that they feel comfortable experimenting and trialing things? And we're really at that forefront of where technology obviously helps provide us with more skills and the capabilities to really be that trusted steward in the market.
Of course. Sounds like you're the sort of person who's quite energized by change. This must be a very exciting time for you. I guess, in the audit space, what are you most excited about in terms of the way that AI is shaping all of that?
Yeah, so AI really lets auditors really do more with data, right? If you think back 20 years ago, we used to receive a lot of data and it was almost thought of as, extra documentation. What do we do with this? Let's just chuck it on a file and move on. Whereas now we're really looking at how can we interrogate that data to really identify those high-risk transactions. So it's really shifting the focus from random sampling to really identifying those transactions or, areas of high risk. So we can make sure we're targeting our testing more acute at what matters most to clients, what matters most to the capital markets. And it's really helping to drive, further insights and deeper quality.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I've heard other people sort of mention that AI might help auditors do full population testing and really dig into these really broad data banks. In your view, how is AI going to practically help auditors really, get more insights from this data?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, we look at something, say machine learning, right, where you're using really advanced data analysis and statistics to help you identify that needle in the haystack transaction. So we're really, and I know we're using it to look at, let's get entire populations of data, put, really advanced capabilities like machine learning to help us identify those outliers. So rather than just picking a large sample or random sample, we're actually able to focus our testing on those actual transactions that really matter, not only from a risk point of view, but they matter to our clients, right? They're the ones that they want to be focusing in on because they're the ones that either present greater risk, they're the ones that operate or might be outside that standard of the audit processes. Not to mention, thinking about how we use AI and other capabilities for things like controls and process mining, right? So let's think through what does a good process look like, and what do the transactions flow, and actually following the numbers through data. So it's going deeper than just having that conversation of what is a process, but actually showing it through the numbers, so we can focus on those transactions that skew away from that happy path.
100%. And I guess you have a good perspective of this as like a tech lead at KPMG, but how are you guys sort of approaching this balance between, the efficiency gains at AI in terms of the time savings, but also, the additional capability? Like, what does that split look like?
Yeah, so I kind of almost think of it as maybe historically audit was about sampling for efficiency, whereas now we're really looking at that whole population of data and scanning for those transactions that present greater risk. Right, so it's not. So we're using technology, not necessarily as an efficiency or time saver, but really to reuse that time into the transactions that we should be focusing on, and it's using that human judgment together with technology, which is what makes it so powerful. Because at the end of the day, technology is an enabler, right? But it's the people that really drive that experience and that professional skepticism, and they know what to look for. They know what to do with that output, and it's how do we then reframe the conversation, not to what does the technology do, but how do we work best with the technology? How are we making sure that we're using it in a trusted and responsible way? How are we making sure that our AI models and capabilities are respecting privacy and security of our clients? How are we making sure that we are applying frameworks to make sure that it's, reliable and accurate and transparent? Because, I'm sure, the people listening are all using AI in their daily lives. And whether you're Googling something personally or professionally, you can tell that AI, sometimes summarizes a document and might remove a word, right? So, I was even using it yesterday to edit, formatting on a PowerPoint. It looked beautiful, but then when I reviewed the output as the human in the loop, I saw that, words had been taken out to make it fit in a nice little box. But those words are really important. So it's, technology is definitely enabler, but how does that human stay on top of the outputs? And what documentation discipline do we really need to make sure that the tools we're using are able to be used for audit evidence purposes? So what is being produced? How are we comfortable with the outputs, and how are we auditing those outputs? So that role of the human just becomes increasingly important in the profession.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners will be, as you said, like deploying AI on their own, possibly in the audit space. And I'm sure grappling with these issues of like governance and risk and privacy, all of those things. How are you guys putting those safeguards in? And what like practical steps have you taken, I guess, to make sure the AI you're using isn't creating these additional risks?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I kind of group it around what good looks like and what do we want the safeguards to then produce at the end of the day. So firstly, it's obviously communicating only to use the approved tools and to use it within the restrictions and guardrails of what that tool is meant to be used for and what it's not meant to be used for. I think then it becomes a question around educating our people on data minimization and only obtaining data that's actually required for that test, and then how to make sure that we're handling really important, sensitive client information deliberately. And then finally, it's around the human review and how do we make sure that we are appropriately training people on what to do with the outputs of that data and AI, because at the end of the day, it's around documenting what you're doing and what you're using it for, and the human is responsible for making all the conclusions for all and any accounting and audit related judgments.
Yeah, 100%. Because I guess when you have an AI tool, I had a question for you in terms of, say an AI tool has been used in an audit and it's contributed to like a mistake or a failure in some way, a bit of a spicy one. I guess how are you approaching accountability in that space in terms of who's responsible for that sort of error?
ultimately it's always the human, right? Technology is an enabler, but it's the human that is responsible to apply that professional judgment and review over every single AI output. And what I see is the biggest risk facing the profession when people are using these tools is how comfortable we are with the outputs, what we're doing from an accountability point of view, and making sure that we're training our people to know what to look for when they're working with AI tools. Like, I'm not sure about you, but when I often use, whether it's Claude or GPT, it always says, that's a great question. And it's always got such a positive spin.
It
right?
loves to compliment you.
Exactly.
Like, oh my God, I am so smart.
Exactly. And so but that's something that people have to be trained on, right? Because it often presents this positive image, but as a professional working in audit or accounting, obviously it's around your professional skepticism, right? And making sure that you are really stress testing what's coming out of it. And, at KPMG, our policy is it is the human that is responsible for every output, and you need to review everything that comes out of AI, because like everyone, we're using technology to review and summarize, and it's great to drive efficiency from that point of view, but it doesn't provide any efficiency gains if you're not reviewing the output and you're not being able to use it in a trusted and responsible way.
True, because it just takes one. I mean, we've seen with the Deloitte AI report,
right.
It just takes one error and it's like, oh my God, everyone knows you're using AI, and it's,
And it's not just about the errors, right? It's about the other risks, right? Like, think about data, right? A big priority for us is making sure we're keeping our clients' data safe. So by using these tools, we now need to think about, okay, the tools, where is it being hosted? Is it being hosted locally? Is it being hosted abroad? Is our client comfortable with that? How are we having those conversations to make sure that we're transparent around what tools exist, what they're being used for, and then what the human's role is in reviewing all technology outputs.
Yeah, 100%. And as we mentioned, we're all kind of dipping our toes into the AI usage. We're all starting to use it, but I think some firms might struggle to communicate how they're using it to clients. What is KPMG's approach to communicating, I guess, AI usage to clients?
We're very transparent. We make sure that our clients are aware of what tools we're using and what we're using them for, and then how we're reviewing the outputs of those tools, and also communicating very strongly our trusted AI policies that wrap around whatever tools are being used. So if you were to go on our website today, you'd be able to see all the AI tools that are being used, and those that they've all gone through our trusted AI assessment to make sure that we are testing for bias, that they are fair, making sure that the data coming out of that is in line with our values, that it is transparent, that it's accountable, it's fair, all of those really important things you need to consider when using AI, right? The biggest risk to the industry is that we're relying on tools that create unfair bias or risk. So making sure that we're training our people to use the tools responsibly, and that ultimately it is just an enabler, right? It's about the human and the professional skepticism, because as auditors, our role is really to be those trusted stewards of the capital markets. The chaos that would ensue if we let the systems run off would just, I don't think anyone wants that. And I think that, we're really lucky that the regulator's been really, upfront at making sure that they are going on that journey, and that they are working and aware of the technology and the risks, and, really making sure that as an industry, we're thinking about how to use tools responsibly and professionally, and what the role of the human continues to be. Yeah,
it feels like everyone's sort of learning at the same time and adapting to this rapidly changing environment. And I also wanted to ask, as KPMG is rolling out AI, here and abroad, do you know of any interesting case studies of an AI use case in audit where it's picked up on something that you don't think maybe a human would have picked up on, or it's got this needle in the haystack finding that's really enhanced analysis? I'd love to hear the case studies of that.
I think we're constantly finding those examples,
really?
Right? I feel like every time we leverage, we have an AI transaction scoring tool, which we use to, use machine learning to identify those needle in the haystack transactions. And every time we share that output with clients, or we, look at one of those transactions, every single time it's, wow, that is the right transaction to look at. Thank you for bringing that to us. Let's look into this in more detail. Similarly, when we're using process mining capabilities, which actually go through and map the transactions, and you kind of feed it, this is your happy path, this is what we'd expect the control life cycle to look like for a transaction. And oh, hang on, this transaction skewed. Oh, okay, you paid that invoice without something being approved beforehand. Let's look into that in more detail. How did that happen? And let's identify ways that we can make sure that the client then can pick that up and go, okay, we need to strengthen our controls in this situation. So I definitely think that, and that's the power of AI, right? It's and allowing us to identify those more risky transactions instead of just randomly sampling, like we would have done maybe historically, based on monetary unit or whatever sampling methodology we were applying at the time. So it's really powerful, right? Because it's moving our audit from randomly testing to testing those higher risk, those interesting, those outside the standard transactions, and making sure that we're focusing our audit evidence and applying our professional judgment on those riskier transactions. So it's a really exciting time to be in the industry.
Yeah, it sounds like, there's a lot changing. I guess in your medium-term view, in the next 5 to 10 years, if I guess AI adoption continues at this pace, what do you think the audit profession is going to look like?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. So I think right now we're still very much at the experimentation phase of technology, right? We're far from it reaching mass adoption and really democratizing access across the entire industry. And so I definitely think today we're definitely still at the phase where the human auditor is using AI as an assistant. So think, your co-pilots of the world. Think about, your machine learning, identifying those risky, interesting transactions. And we're still really just using it for research and summarizing documents and using, chatbots to help us, feed it, whatever our standards or whatever our testing is, and help it teach and coach us in real time. I think where we're going to go over the really short term, though, is us obviously working together with AI agents, right? And we're starting to see that kind of agentic capability coming into our global workflows that help, you ask the agent to help do a first stab at a work paper, right? And obviously, as a human, you then have to review all those outputs and make sure that you're comfortable with what's being documented and document what considerations you've done and how you're comfortable with what's being put as audit evidence. But I think where we're going to go is definitely to that human-led, agent-operated ecosystem. And that's where obviously the human role is very much to set the scope, the strategy, identify, what the risks are for the industry, and really work with the technology to really change how we're auditing. I definitely think where we're seeing is the interconnectivity of data is allowing a lot more of almost a continuous audit strategy away from a point in time. So in the future, it's just going to be about how do we make sure that as trusted stewards of the market, we are being proactive in our approach. We're not just waiting until the end of the year to do analysis, but looking at those transactions as they occur to make sure that we are that the market and stakeholders and other market investors are able to rely on, trusted, audited financials. So I think it's a really exciting time to be in industry.
Yeah, it really sounds like AI is going to revolutionize a lot in the audit space. And I guess in terms of you guys have been trialing AI throughout KPMG a little bit. Do you have any and obviously it's a lot of a trial and error period right now. Are there any lessons that you guys have learned, or I guess little mini failures that you've learned from that you think, might benefit our listeners?
Yeah, so I think what we've found is a really great approach is we often say that we treat technology as we are KPMG as client zero. So we're not going to ever use something that externally that we haven't used internally, so we can stress test it.
Right.
We can see where it works, where it doesn't work, where it's still, and where we still need to pivot a little bit, where the outputs aren't as reliable as we'd expect it to because we know our own data. So I think getting really comfortable with trialing and piloting and experimenting, and also getting the culture, and as accountants, we're risk averse, right? That's what makes us so powerful in the market. But actually reframing the mindset to actually being comfortable to experiment and trial things. And you know what? if you get it right 100% of the time, you're not trying really hard enough. So getting comfortable with, how do we learn and apply those learnings going forward for future technologies? Because while right now AI is definitely a powerful technology and capability, new technologies are just going to continue to evolve. And we've seen that over time, right? If you look back 20 years ago, when I started audit, we were auditing in pen and paper. We was using Excel was a revolutionary technology tool. And then we kind of dovetailed into data and analytics and how can we do more with clients' data to do different test work from a substantive point of view. And now obviously the explosion of AI, so we're really using it to help learn and summarize. But, in the future, there will be other technologies, right? Like quantum providing irrefutable, how is quantum going to impact the industry? How's blockchain? I went hard on blockchain. I was really passionate about it.
Really?
Yeah, and I still think that we haven't necessarily seen how blockchain, I think it's a bit early in that life cycle.
How do you think it could impact? Because I feel like you have a really great perspective as someone who's so involved in the tech.
Well, I think I remember reading an article, and this must have been over a decade ago, that was thinking that blockchain was going to be the biggest impact to accounting since double entry accounting, right? Because suddenly we have total transparency over both sides of the transaction. It's irrefutable. The audit evidence lives on the blockchain. You can't change it. It's reliable. It's evidence-based. And so, if you think about that, in the lens of our clients that work, maybe across borders, suddenly, something like intercompany where you don't necessarily, you can see irrefutable where the transaction is, what the value is, and that both parties have signed off on it. And you see it in real time. So I just think that as an industry, making sure that we stay at the forefront and excited by these changes, we practice, we experiment, we figure out how the technology works and how to use it safely, responsibly, so that it can scale. I remember I'm a big believer that every time there's a new technology, think about electricity, right? Where society got efficiency out of technology was when everyone was using it consistently. And I do feel like we're almost at that point with AI and others, that it's when the whole industry really leans in that we can share these great use cases and what's working well. I think about how we can apply AI and simulations and rapid prototyping to training people, right? That's a great way that our new starters can learn, how to do a search for unrecorded liability test is by, actually seeing how it happens. It's a more advanced way of shadowing. So how can we use technology to really enhance the industry as a whole?
Yeah, I guess on that point of new grads coming through, how is AI shifting the entry level workloads for them? Are you seeing them accelerate more into advanced work earlier, or how's that playing out?
I definitely think what we're thinking as leaders is how do we make sure that our new starters are learning how to review as well as how to do. Right? Because now as technology starts being able to do some of that, if I think back to my first week at the job, my job was to get a set of financials that were printed out, and I'd have a calculator and I'd have to add each column to make sure that it added up. But, we laugh about those days. But again, that's how, the older generation learned how a cash flow statement work, how important it is to have liquidity in a business, understand the real dynamics of our clients and how the numbers flow through. And so what we're seeing the shift now is how do we make sure that the people starting, our new graduates and our new starters, are able to access that knowledge and training, and how do they know what to look for when they're reviewing it? So it's shifting from, maybe doing to reviewing at a much more junior stage. And, it's really exciting because no longer is the role of a junior auditor, just to sit there with a calculator and add up a row, but it's actually to start having those more judgmental conversations and looking at those higher risk transactions earlier. So it's such a rewarding role for them as they're coming into the firm.
And we see AI is kind of shifting the nature of a lot of work in accounting. Say if I was a new grad in accounting, in the audit space, what skills would you tell me to really double down on right now that you think might benefit me over the next, 5 years?
I think it's having a thirst for knowledge, right? Because technology, how we do things is going to constantly change. So being excited by the change, leaning into the change, thinking about how you can how, your critical thinking skills so that you can challenge and question the output of technology, how to start getting that professional skepticism earlier, how to have conversations with clients. So much of what we do in audit is really around that professional services and client service part. So how can they gain that knowledge of how to conduct themselves in the office and how to talk to clients around what matters to clients? I'd tell the junior starters to be hungry for information. The best auditors are always the ones that are deeply ingrained in industry and understand the challenges of that industry and what's happening, what the risks are happening to that industry as well as our own. So to have that thirst for knowledge and eagerness to learn and change, and able to, be adaptable and flexible and be excited by the change. I think those that are excited and can use the technology are definitely going to set themselves apart because they're going to use that technology to drive efficiencies in their own way of working, right? They will be using technology to help them summarize. They'll be using technology to ask quick questions. What's the best way to test X, Y, Z, and having their agents or their co-pilots really supporting them with that information. So it just means that those that do leverage the technology will just leapfrog against their fellow colleagues.
Exciting. It sounds like having a passion, a bit of curiosity goes a long way. And I guess there might be a few of our listeners who are maybe in the audit space and thinking maybe a bit hesitant to roll out AI tools in their own workflows. I guess what advice would you give to somebody who's a little bit hesitant to use AI and getting started?
I would say start using it yourself personally in low-risk areas, right? Start asking AI in your personal life around something that you are an SME about, right? I often use AI tools for everything from, what should I cook for dinner? What is a play area in the immediate vicinity that's appropriate for children aged X, Y, Z? And you get better at prompting and knowing how to frame the question to get the answer that provides you value and benefit. So getting comfortable doing it in a really low-risk environment like your personal life, you can then apply those learnings and that practice to how you work day in, day out. And I also think that there's no point hiding from technology, right? That's not going to help you today or in the future. So how you can get more comfortable with trialing, and failing forward. You're not always going to get it right. So it's better to do it in a low-risk environment. Talk to friends, talk to colleagues, ask them how they're using it. I always find it really interesting. Obviously I talk to, individuals I went to university with, and we've all taken very different career paths, but having conversations with them around how they're applying technology, how they're using agents, what work they're doing to review, what challenges they're facing, whether they're in professional services or a different industry, because you can always apply learnings from somewhere else and think, wow, how does that impact me and how can I do better with what I've got?
Yeah, 100%. Definitely using ChatGPT personally. I know there's some things it's really good at, some things it's not so good at. So I guess it's good to get a feel for that.
Yeah, and I love when it prompts you with additional questions. You're like, I hadn't thought of that framing. That's a really good idea. And you just get used to that, having that conversation with technology. And it saves you time personally as well as professionally, right?
Yeah, and sometimes, it does bring up ideas that you never would have thought on yourself. So, yeah, love you, ChatGPT. And I guess, are there any misconceptions about the use of AI in audit that you'd like to clear up as someone who might not understand how it's kind of being used right now?
Yeah, I think that there's this narrative that it's this big black box, right? And we don't know what goes in and we don't know what comes out. And I don't think anyone in industry is using AI as a black box, right? We're using machine learning to help us identify the higher risk transactions, but that's just based off statistical models. There's no, real AI or cognitive in there. It does remember what you did last time and apply it to the next year, but there's no black box of not knowing how it came to that judgment. I think the other thing is, I think everyone in industry really takes their role of, professional skepticism and stewards of trust seriously, right? As an industry, I like to think that we all take our role as, providing trust in capital markets seriously. So I don't think anyone wants to use technology for the wrong way. And so I think we're all in this period of experimentation and looking at how can I use it to maybe do something low risk, like summarizing or asking it questions of how to do something better, and then working with it to then apply your professional judgment of, okay, well, you're right, that is a great transaction to focus on, or you're right, wow, that's done a great summary of that documentation, or alternatively using technology to really I was thinking of another great example, and I've just lost it. But,
That's okay.
Just thinking through how we can work with the technology in a much smarter way.
100%. And I'm sure we could talk about this all day, but I guess before we wrap up, what is, I guess, one AI tool that you're the most excited about right now in the audit space?
All right. I just remembered the other example.
Oh,
Contract
go for it.
reading, right? Contract reading. How many people out there have reviewed when working with your clients, hundreds of pages of revenue contracts, right? Being able to use a tool that helps you identify a clause quicker than scrolling through 30 or 50 pages is a much better use of time. And obviously, you then have to review that output. But even that kind of review and helping identify using natural language is really powerful. And I think that's the other thing that technology is enabling, is that natural language review, right? No longer is technology only accessible to those data scientists in industry, but now we can actually talk to the tools to help it guide what we should be looking at. And so it's really democratizing access of technology to everyone in industry. So it's out there. So we just need to get comfortable as individuals to work with it, figure out how to use it responsibly, safely, with safeguards and controls and processes, to really, as an industry, move together.
Yeah, awesome. That sounds like such a great use case as well, because it's like something you can really cross-check as well and like by yourself. So it's really like quite, foolproof in that sense.
All right. So you asked what technology am I most excited about. So I have gone deep the last week on a capability called vibe coding. So I don't know if anyone out there knows what vibe coding is.
Tell me what it is, because I'm a little unfamiliar.
Vibe coding is basically providing accessibility to programming, right? And creating prototypes of tools or documents or whatever it is to visually show something that you're trying to describe. And, obviously I wouldn't use this kind of capability with client or KPMG data, but, often in work you're trying to explain a concept or explain how you want to do something. And using vibe coding actually allows you to create a really quick prototype of whatever you're trying to do. So I'll share an example, right? Last week, I put one prompt into a vibe coding platform, and I said, I'm CTO of a Big Four firm, and I want to help show what a smart catalog would be to recommend tools to audit teams to use based on risk, size, and industry that their client works on. So it was one very quick prompt, and within 25 seconds, I had this beautiful interface that then I could provide to my developers to say, hey, I want you to build this out because I think this would be really powerful. And so, I'm not a coder. I think I've done very basic Python programming at university, so I could send myself an email automatically. But it's providing that kind of really incredible coding access to literally anyone. All it takes is a prompt, and obviously I could continue to work with it and say, actually, can you tweak it for these industries or these tools? But it's just incredibly powerful that some of these capabilities that were reserved for a really small part of the population is now so easily accessible to everyone.
So you just write in like some words and then it writes a whole code to fulfill that
Correct. And not only a code, but a beautiful interface that actually and so a lot of individuals are using it to create websites or apps or ideas, and it's all it takes is a prompt, and it creates this really visually appealing interface that you can interact with and change, and then again continue to use natural language to evolve.
Wow, that sounds so fun. Like I want to try, find a reason to try that in my job somehow.
Yeah, and then you start going deep, and you're like, oh, actually, can you change this to KPMG branding? And it searches the internet for what KPMG's branding is, and actually, can you change this to be a slider instead of a button? And it just happens automatically. So all of those kind of things that would have historically taken, a programmer hours, days to do, you can do a really quick mock-up and then provide it to the SME to then go build out for greater use. So I think there's a lot of change happening. And so, again, I wouldn't use it for, confidential data or anything, but it's a great way, instead of me drawing on a sheet of paper how I want something to work, to show it in, I'm a visual person. It's great to show it visually.
What sort of things have you used that for?
So I used it, for that tool. I also used it to create what I want out of a resource and financial management system where, you feed it the engagement budgets and it creates a really nice resourcing dashboard and creates what impact to the financials it would be, and be able to use sensitivity and scenario analysis to change how, what headcount would be around X or Y. So again, all out of the possible, but it just shows how quickly the space is moving, and how if you're hungry or, want to learn more, you definitely can. And I know, colleagues are using it to prototype, websites or deal boards or whatever it might be, to really show, visually an idea that may have historically been a slide or a PowerPoint pack or a Word document, or a quick video. You can now quickly prompt and create capability. So it's a really exciting time in industry.
Yeah, so there's a space for a lot of creativity, which is very fun. We love that. But Elenie, thank you so much for joining me on Under the Hood today. It's been an absolute pleasure having you. For the listeners, if you'd like to get in contact with me, you can reach me at emma.partis@momentummedia.com.au. Until next time, bye for now.
The information featured in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into consideration your financial situation or individual needs, and should not be relied upon. Before making any investment, insurance, tax, property or financial planning decision, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you. Guests appearing on this podcast may have a commercial relationship with the companies mentioned.